Welcome into the Footballguys.com Power Grid Week 2. I am your host, Cecil Lammy, joined by the best group of minds in fantasy football and certainly in DFS, and also with a special guest this week. And let's start with that guest because he's the boss. He's David Dodds, Footballguys.com owner. David, what's up, baby? I noticed the Keenan Allen jersey.
I am. I'm rocking it. It's a sad day as we lost Keenan for the year, but football's back. That's always good, and happy to be on the show.
Yeah, we're going to pick your brain about what happens in San Diego coming up a little bit later. Devin Knotts is in the building, and no Dak Prescott jersey today.
No, thankfully I didn't have any Dak last week, so it was a good week.
Austin Lee is here smiling and ready to go.
I am ready, man. That Sunday of football was a little bit crazy. I'm glad we got off on the right foot with week 1. That was a ton of close games.
Yeah, a ton of close games in Pasquino. Jeff Pasquino, of course, joining the program. We kind of got that tip-off from Thursday night. It was going to be a good week of football, and it was.
Yeah, absolutely. The first games were stellar. The second set were solid, and then the first Monday night was spectacular. And hopefully, you got some sleep before the second game.
Yeah, just take a little bit of a nap, John, and especially if you're a Todd Gurley owner. Well, maybe you should have taken a nap.
Yeah, Todd Gurley was a big disappointment. I think we'll talk more about him in a bit, but I was quite happy to wake up on Tuesday morning and realize that I missed that last game because on the East Coast, that was crazy late for the ending.
Well, let's get into our first topic. We're going to spin you around the NFL, go over some news and notes. But first, it's some Week 1 surprises. So one from each of you, and Dodds, we'll start with you. In Week 1, several things. I love how the narrative changes in the NFL. It kind of updates. What was one of your top Week 1 surprises?
Yeah, I think you could look at that San Francisco team. I think we were expecting – I don't know what we were expecting, to be honest. I mean, I think we had – was Quentin Patton the guy? What's Torrey Smith? What's their role? How are they going to use their backs? And it actually looked pretty good. And, in fact, their defense looked remarkably good. I mean, so it's interesting. I obviously live close to the Bay Area here, but we had zero expectations for the San Francisco unit. Think it might be a 2-win team. Now there's some hope, some optimism. So it's just again, not a great team, but I think Chip Kelly has them playing pretty good football for the team they have on paper.
Memo to Jeff Fisher, change your damn play calls, man. Come on. Just got an extension. Devin, your Week 1 surprise. Who is it?
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off David and bust his balls a little bit, but Case Keenum looked awful, sailing balls over his wide receiver's head. But the surprise for me this week would really be Jimmy Garoppolo and how well he played in that Patriots offense. It really looked like as if they didn't miss too much of a beat, and now after he looked horrible in the preseason, he's really looking like he's stepping into a role where he can at least be manageable and be serviceable from a fantasy perspective over the next couple weeks.
Yeah, Josh McDaniels gets 8 months to put together a game plan, and Garoppolo can hit a wide-open guy. Austin Lee, I don't blow bubbles on this show, except for you, buddy. So what was your Week 1 surprise?
I was surprised to see Melvin Gordon get into the end zone twice.
Yeah.
That I was not expecting to see. And Danny Woodhead got like twice as many snaps as him, and Gordon got into the end zone twice. So I'm curious to see how the San Diego running game moves without Keenan Allen and whether Woodhead gets more action in the passing game with Keenan Allen out. So I've got my eye on that San Diego running game a little bit. Those touchdowns were surprising.
Yeah, it was odd that Mike McCoy decided, hey, we got a big lead. Let's start throwing the ball. Pasquino, you're up with your Week 1 surprise.
I was pleasantly surprised by the return of Victor Cruz. I think everybody expected that OBJ would be getting all the touchdowns and lots of action. He had 3 touchdown passes from Eli, and they all went to 3 different guys. None of them were OBJ.
And John Lee, you get to wrap it up with the Week 1 surprises. Who was it?
Well, I think that there's a few things we could talk about here, but the one surprise that really stuck out, I think for all of us, was just the general ineptitude of the Seattle Seahawks offense against the Dolphins at home. They entered that game as a big 10.5-point favorite, and I think they had a grand total somewhere in the neighborhood of 240 yards. It's kind of scary moving forward to think about what that offense can or cannot do when they're not playing at home with an injured Russell Wilson. So it's something we certainly have to monitor closely as they move forward into the season.
Well, in season-long fantasy, of course, you got to worry about injuries. And in DFS, you have to worry about, well, okay, now who steps up after those injuries? So we're going to spin it around an injury for each one of you. And, David, I promise I'm going to pick your brain about the Keenan Allen situation. I mean, Travis Benjamin, the speed guy, does he get more? Is it Tyrell Williams, who, could be a hot pickup? Is he the guy that steps into Allen's role? Is it nobody? Is it more Gates? Is it more Woodhead? How do the Chargers approach this now, yet again, without Keenan Allen?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of every one of those pieces you said. Clearly, as the losses mount, and I suspect that's going to happen on the San Diego team based on the defense that they throw out there each week. So as those losses mount, I expect all eyes to be on Gates to try to get him his 8 touchdowns to get in the record books. So you're going to see probably more of that happen. I definitely like Travis Benjamin as more of that deep threat, as you say. Woodhead will probably fill some of that slot role, even though he comes out of the backfield, et cetera, but it's essentially similar type plays than Keenan Allen would run into the space part of the field. And then obviously Tyrell Williams, they're expecting big things from him. We're much more excited with Keenan Allen and Tyrell Williams on the field. That dents their offense a bit. I do think it's a situation, though, that even though it's next man up and the next man are not as good, and Keenan was a star there, I just think it's a situation that San Diego's defense is so bad. This team is going to throw a lot. They are going to put a lot of fantasy points. So, honestly, you need to hit the waiver wire in normal leagues. And in DFS, a lot of these guys that are going to be way underpriced for these first early weeks should definitely be in play. I think Travis Benjamin's an excellent play this week against relatively soft corners of Jacksonville to hit the end zone. And then Woodhead should see a bunch of targets as well.
Dodds, back to you on the Melvin Gordon thing, which Austin brought up. That was odd that he actually got in the end zone. I mean, could it be a little bit more of Gordon there? And it sounds like, from what you're saying, you are not fading Rivers whatsoever.
No, I think we're going to see a lot more Gordon. I mean, obviously they drafted him to be the guy. Isn't Woodhead? I think Woodhead's like 32 years old. And undersized by all NFL standards. I mean, I know he's beaten the odds everywhere he's been and everything, but I think San Diego went into this season trying to fit more of a role to Gordon. I think you saw them come out with a game plan of that. The Keenan Allen injury kind of messed a bit. I think than we would have probably seen. But I think the move is definitely Gordon in the red zone. I think that's where they want to move this to. But again, Gordon is interesting because he'll have 3 yards, 2 yards, and then a 19-yard burst. I mean, so he has immense talent. Questionable line. The offense isn't perfect, so he's just going to have a lot of negative yardage or 0 yardage plays as well. But I think the team's kind of willing to suffer through some of that for his home run potential.
Now, I noticed Devin sniffling. It wasn't the Lou Malnati's a little bit too much red pepper, but is it because Robert Griffin III down for the Cleveland Browns? And here comes Josh McCown, right? We know this. Fantasy owners should feel positive because it is a known, and Gary Barnidge owners or DFS players should now look at Barnidge differently. What are your thoughts now, Devin, with RG3 down?
Yeah, as a Browns fan, I'm actually a little bit happy, if you will, that RG3 was injured. He just couldn't get it done in Cleveland. I think his career may be in jeopardy here if he can't get it together in the last 8 games, however long he's out. But Gary Barnidge sees a huge uptick in production this week. Josh McCown had him as his number 1 receiver. Last year he was averaging 8 to 9 targets a game, and he should really see an uptick in production and be the Browns' only wide receiver or tight end threat in the passing game this week.
Well, I promised that I didn't do this because Dodds is on the show, and it's not a Chargers show. Maybe it's a Broncos show. But we got to talk about the team against the Chargers, Austin, and that's where you come in with Chris Ivory. I feel that going from a hospital bed on Monday to the field across the country on Sunday, let's just look at TJ Yeldon perhaps doing more. We mentioned how bad that Chargers defense is. And again, it's across the country, but you look at what Jacksonville could possibly do with more of Yeldon. What are your thoughts here, Austin, on what Jacksonville is facing in week 2?
Well, the matchup is right for TJ Yeldon here, but TJ Yeldon was incredibly inefficient with his carries last week, and I don't see that increasing by a ton. It'll get a little bit better because it was pretty abysmal last week, but Jacksonville is not really slated to score a lot of points in this game. Their implied team total is only 22 points, which I don't quite get. They're the underdog here in San Diego, and I actually like them to win this game, but I don't think either team is scoring a lot of points in this game. So I'm off Yeldon this week.
Well, Jeff Pasquino, let's get to you, and let's get to Zach Ertz with this rib injury. Now, as we're making this recording on Thursday, I don't believe Ertz has been pronounced out yet. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think he's going to play. And here comes Brent Selleck, guy that I said years ago couldn't even bend over to tie his own shoes, has made about a 10-year pro career. So thank you for that, Brent. But what does it mean for DFS? Is there anything to see here? Again, we know the Peterson offense can be tight end friendly, and we know that, hey, Carson Wentz, man, weak Bears defense. You need a little Monday night punch. Are you looking at anything here with Ertz down?
Well, there's always the chance this bites me, but I don't see much coming from Brent Selleck. He's a glorified tackle. I think you're going to see more dump passes to Matthews, Jordan or Ryan, and Darren Sproles. They didn't use him very much in week 1. So I think that Selleck is going to be a glorified tackle this week. He occasionally breaks out in a route, especially in the red zone. Maybe you'll get a target, but I don't see much. I don't think he's nearing the end of his career as well, so I don't see much for him if he pulls gold this week.
Well, an injury situation worth watching in Seattle is what happened with Russell Wilson, and it was a non-dirty play for Ndamukong Suh. We always have to, highlight that because usually when you say Sue hurt a guy, it's like, okay, dirty play. And John, you're up with Russell Wilson traveling to face the Rams in Los Angeles, a team that should be fired up because basically they were humiliated in the game nobody saw on the East Coast. So, Wilson against the Rams, things looked a bit out of sorts against the Dolphins in Seattle, and he's hurt. How much hesitancy do you have putting him in a DFS lineup this week?
Yeah, I think this week is definitely a week you want to avoid Russell Wilson. They finally have released the line in Vegas, and they are a 7-point favorite, which is a little higher than I expected. That said, I think this week is going to be all about the running game there in Seattle. We should see a lot more of Thomas Rawls this week. I'm not sure how much Kristen Michael will see, but I do think we'll see a whole lot of those guys just pounding the ball at this Los Angeles Rams front seven, the same front seven that gave up a pair of touchdowns this weekend to Carlos Hyde. So I think that this could be a good spot for the Seattle running game while they try to allow Russell Wilson to heal up over the next week or so.
Well, I'll throw in a bonus injury comment about Broncos wide receiver Demaryius Thomas. Now, I'm out at the facility every day and saw Demaryius practice. If we talked 12 hours ago, I would say, wow, Demaryius, that first day, he wasn't running well. He wasn't moving well. He looked very labored when he had to make some sort of comeback route. It was very slow. It wasn't the normal Demaryius. Today, I'm not saying 180 turnaround, but he looked much better. And as we get closer to Sunday against the Colts, maybe Demaryius in a matchup where basically Denver should be able to do whatever they want to, run on him, pass on him. Maybe we see a little bit more of Demaryius Thomas than we would have thought of, let's say a day ago or 12 hours ago, what have you. Dodds, I'm going to put you on the spot with that Broncos passing game. Are you thinking about maybe Sanders with this hip problem with Demaryius? You just heard me talk about Demaryius. Your thoughts on what Denver could do through the air?
I'm all on board the Trevor Train this week. I think this Indy team is awful. I mean, seriously, this Indy team, it's a bunch of has-beens. Guys are out of the league. Virtually their whole team's hurt. They have no pass rush. Stafford just ate it alive. I mean, when the game was even close, to being called the fourth quarter, he just threw it every single down. I mean, guys were just seriously wide open. That team was all gassed by the end of the game. So – obviously, Denver could probably maul him on the ground as well, but I think Trevor, from what I saw against obviously a really tough front against Carolina, he was sliding in and out, and he looked poised for somebody with no real NFL game experience. I think he's going to shred this team. I think this is the game. They get on his back, try to get him a ton of confidence going into the season. So I think you're going to see all their weapons come out. I mean, Fowler probably have a big game. You'll see Virgil Green heavily. I think they're going to throw the ball a lot in this contest. with or without Demaryius Thomas. So, yeah, I love Sanders. I love Virgil Green. I love the Trevor Show.
The Trevor Train. We're going to get that hashtag trending in Denver. And by the way, you got to put it on film because Cincinnati's waiting. And Trevor Siemian averaged 5 air yards per attempt, third lowest in the NFL. Let's talk about revenge factors up next as the Power Grid continues here at footballguys.com. And KC Houston playoff rematch. Devin, you're up. We've been talking a lot about the San Diego game, and we know that last week you got away from KC. And you're thinking, oh, man, Spencer Ware, here goes the game script. And he still produced at a incredibly high level because of his ability as a receiver. What about against Houston? What about Houston now saying, thank God we don't have Brian Hoyer. I guess we've got Brock Osweiler. How much better is that against the KC defense that is clearly not what we thought they could be because of injury?
Yeah, what's interesting is that Spencer Ware and Charkandrick West actually split snaps equally at both at 34 last week. So that was a little bit surprising. I was off Spencer Ware last week because of that split, and it hurt me a little bit. But this week, I don't love this game. I think it's going to be a slow, low-scoring game, similar to almost a playoff style. I think that both teams utilize the running game, and it's going to be a slower tempo than other games that you have to target. So this is one that I'm really not on. I don't like Osweiler as a quarterback. I just don't think he's worth the money or the production that they paid him. And you know, you look at last year, and while Hoyer doesn't have the name, look at the total stats, and they weren't that bad. So I think that signing Lamar Miller, they're going to go to more of a run approach, and it's going to be more of a slower, low-scoring game.
Austin, let's talk playoff rematch again with Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. What could be different this time around? Also the return of Marcus Wheaton, which I think should impact what Sammy Coates does, maybe not Eli Rogers.
I think you got to keep using the players in this Pittsburgh offense until they prove otherwise. I mean, D'Angelo Williams until Le'Veon Bell is back. Antonio Brown is, you got to put these guys in your cash games and have a lot of exposure to them, in my opinion. A.J. Green on the other side of the ball, they really don't have a whole lot else going on the offense, and so he's going to be targeted super heavily in this game. I think that you can't go wrong with A.J. Green or the Pittsburgh side of this. The Vegas totals have this to be a fairly high-scoring game at 49-ish points. So I'm loading up on Brown and Williams in my cash lineups.
He's Austin Lee. He's not invested in C.J. Uzomah, Devin.
No, start Antonio Brown every week in your cash game until he proves you wrong.
Yeah, I cannot go wrong there. Let's talk Dallas-Washington rivalry. Alfred Morris there, if you want to get cute with things. But this should be a big day. Washington can't – I know they signed Colin Jenkins, Jeff, but they can't stop the run. D'Angelo Williams is still running right now against Washington's defense. I don't care what you do. Bring that pot roast. Put an actual traffic jam on the field. They're not going to stop the run. So, Zeke Elliott, what are you thinking here now about Dallas and Washington this week?
I think you're going to see a lot of Zeke Elliott this week, and I think they're going to run him a lot early and often, take the pressure off of Dak Prescott. This is what they really wanted to do in week one, but it didn't work out that way. But they're going to run the ball 30, 35 times, and if they get a lead, they may bring in Morris or dispel Elliott with him because, it's a rivalry game for him. So I could see both these guys finding the end zone. I think we're looking at 100 yards for Elliott this week.
And finally, in revenge factor fashion, John, Terrence West returns to Cleveland. I'm generally avoiding Baltimore's running back situation like the plague, and it's going to get worse when Kenneth Dixon comes back in 3 weeks. But Terrence West returning to Cleveland, anything there, anything from this contest?
Not unless we hear anything from Coach Harbaugh that he's going to give him a full bevy of carries. I mean, last week he got lucky at an actual split with Justin Forsett, but that was because Buck Allen was a healthy scratch on Sunday. If Buck Allen plays, both of those guys will be out on third down, and they're just going to continue vulturing each other until Dixon comes and takes over the lead job, as you intimated there. So I think that this is probably just a stay away completely. There's some narrative street there. if you're going to take him, I think it's on DraftKings at 3,300 where the price is really low. But I think I'm staying away, and if I have any exposure at all, it's very minimal, and it's GPP only.
Well, there's such a thing in fantasy football and DFS, which is called the week one overreaction. So our next segment is real or fool's gold. And Dodds, it's up to you about Oakland, man. Is it just the Saints defense? We got to do the old Chris Farley air quotes, like the Saints play defense down in Louisiana in the Superdome where they try to play defense. Well, we know the Raiders have some really good talent. Amari Cooper, Michael Crabtree, Latavius Murray, of course, at running back, DeAndre Washington, a rook that I like. But is it real or fool's gold with Oakland's offense, Dodds?
Well, I think Amari Cooper is the one that most of us had our eyes on. I mean, obviously, the news stories in the offseason talked about him playing all year with plantar fasciitis. If that's true, that's He-Man levels of greatness. And I think we saw some of that. I mean, admittedly, this New Orleans defense is among the worst in the league. I mean, them and San Diego will pretty much battle for that honor, I think, all season long. So New Orleans can heavily be exploited. They're down a man again. That's going to be crazy. But I do think this Oakland offense is starting to kind of find itself, and I think Amari Cooper is real. He's a legit top receiver in this league, and I think we're going to hear his name a lot this season. So I think this offense with Amari Cooper is going to be pretty outstanding.
Devin, you're up. Let's talk about Derek Carr and Cooper and everybody. Real or fool's gold on Oakland?
I love Amari Cooper's talent. You look at all the way dating back to Alabama, and he's the only Alabama receiver that has really stood out in Nick Saban's offense, which just shows that how much Nick Saban loved him, and he's showing that into Oakland, and he's just a dominant force. I expect big things this year from Amari Cooper.
Yeah, when Cooper came out of Alabama, he always reminded me of Marvin Harrison with more power. So that route running, it's a dangerous thing. Let's talk about Tampa Bay, Austin. Things started off slowly for Jameis, and then he got fired up. The Jameis train, I guess, or crab boat, whatever you want to call it. Tampa Bay's passing game. Now, there's no Vincent Jackson. There's I got a milk carton the other day from Greeley that's got Vincent Jackson's picture on it. But it's really, is Jameis legit? Is he going to take that step in year two, Austin?
I am not buying it. I think that Tampa Bay and the Falcons sometimes have these shootouts, but Tampa Bay's game plan is generally to have a ball control offense, run low snap counts in their games, and I think that this was an exception. I think we're going to see lower passing attempts from Jameis Winston in future games, and he's not going to be a guy that you're going to try to target in a GPP the way that he looked like this past week. So I would say don't go diving headfirst into chasing last week's stats on this guy.
And I would wonder why Atlanta can never play defense. Jeff, you're up, and I'll give you both of them, brother. Oakland passing game, Tampa passing game, real or fool's gold?
Well, I like both passing games. I really like Oakland this week. I think that they're going to get the tight end going this weekend. We saw what Tampa did to Atlanta. I think you're going to see Wolford get open the middle and probably find that end zone this weekend. So I think that's a tight end not one I don't see anybody talking about, but I think that's a good sleeper play. I like Atlanta as well. I think they finally got a second wide receiver, which they've been hunting for with Sanu, and that really opens things up. And Tammy is another sleeper tight end who had a lot of PPR production last week. There's some value tight ends out there this week that not many people are really targeting.
Yeah, not many people talking about. John, you're up to talk about it, and real or fool's gold on these offenses.
I like both of these offenses moving forward. I think that Oakland has a special set of skilled players, and they can distribute the ball on both the ground and through the air. And I think that's something that goes underrated when an offense can only throw the ball or only run the ball. We can use the Rams as an example there. If you're only able to run the ball, it really makes you one-dimensional and can affect the output. But when you're able to do whatever you want to do with the talent that you have on the field, and I think that Latavius Murray and DeAndre Washington, these are two talented running backs, they're going to keep their opposing defenses honest, and I think that opens up a lot of options for those quarterbacks. And I feel similarly about Jameis Winston. I think that he was outstanding in his rookie season, and I actually kind of disagree a little bit with Austin, I guess. I think this offense moving forward, Jameis Winston is a guy we should be keeping our eyes on. The game script last week actually did not work against them. They were actually winning in the third quarter, and they continued to pass. He ended up with 4 touchdowns. And Vincent Jackson, 7 targets and 2 receptions. That's one thing I think we need to look at moving forward. Were those 5 incompletions when he was being shadowed, or rather covered by Desmond Trufant, And if they were, I think that things get better for him in week 2 and beyond.
Next up on the Power Grid, we get to talk about Vegas. Dodds, let's talk about Vegas. Not about what I do in Vegas, but let's talk about Vegas and what it's telling you for DFS plays this week.
Well, I just got back from Vegas. Yeah, so Vegas, it's always good to look at the lines and the over-unders as just a good, point to guys that really could produce. I've been blogging all week kind of about what I call criteria factors, and one of the criteria is exactly that, is people within their position or players within their position that will actually have the upper half of the expected team points. And I think it's critical because I think that points a lot to what upside plays, et cetera, that are available in contests. So guys that, I think the Denver is a great example of, a great plus situation. So virtually everybody in Denver is in play. And there's a few others. Obviously people talk about the Pittsburgh game. The New York Giants game is another one that has high upside potential, and likely that translates to a lot of fantasy points.
What does Vegas say to you this week, Devin?
It says I need to go there soon, but the biggest thing is don't overreact. Everyone is in love with the Saints-Giants game because it has an over 53.5, and they're just trying to fit as many people into it as possible. Realistically, 53.5 versus a game like the Tampa Bay versus Arizona game at 50. Is there that big of a difference? Or Atlanta versus Oakland at 50? There's really not that big of a difference from a DFS perspective. So don't overreact and just stack the entire game because we don't typically see 53.5 when there's other games that are within 3 points of an over-under.
Yeah, it's definitely a different or maybe even a little bit of an odd week for Vegas. Austin, what are you taking away?
I like that Oakland-Atlanta game a lot. I think that people are going to be a little bit off of Atlanta after Julio Jones had a disappointing week last week, and so I think we could see low ownership on Julio for him. He's still going to be relatively well owned, but I think Antonio Brown and Beckham are going to have much higher ownership than him. So I think Julio makes an interesting stackable play in GPPs. And I think on the Oakland side of the ball, I like Derek Carr as a cash play this week. He's kind of a mid-priced QB. And, I like the receivers for the reasons we talked about earlier. I really like this game as kind of targeting both offenses, both in cash and in GPPs.
Jeff Pasquino's always got his eyes on Vegas. What are those eyes seen this week?
Well, I've been one to visit a sports book now and then from time to time. But the Giants game is definitely – the Giants-New Orleans is going to be the game everybody's circling, everybody's looking at for studs. But I'm looking at a game that's got a relatively middle-of-the-road total, but Carolina is actually projected to score the most points this week, and not many people are circling that because they're favored by 13 points. But if you project it out, as John has already done for us, they're projected to score 29 points this week. So I love Cam Newton. I think he's going to be involved in a lot of the touchdowns. I also like Jonathan Stewart, who also is not getting much mention this week.
Well, in Carolina, we didn't mention him in revenge factor, but it's almost kind of revenge against themselves for Graham Gano missing that field goal against Denver. John, we're looking at Vegas trying to decipher the best information. What's it telling you for DFS?
Yeah, these guys are making some great points. The one that I like best, no offense to the rest of you four, but I think Devin nailed it with his analysis on focusing on that New Orleans Giants game. There's no shame in targeting that game, and in fact, I'll try to have as much exposure to it as possible. But if you look at the implied team totals across the board, there are a lot of other teams that are within a point or two of those teams. And because of what happened last week in New Orleans, all the attention is going to be given towards that Giants-New Orleans game and not a whole lot of attention given to the others. And so from a GPP's perspective, from a game strategy perspective, you should be looking at those other games and really focusing in on them. One that I think from a value perspective I'll be checking out, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier with this Terrence West, Justin Forsett split, is what's going on in that Baltimore offense. I'm going to try to parse that apart in my process over the next day or two and figure out exactly who I can trust and where the opportunity is going, because that team total is surprisingly 25 points after last week. They couldn't get anything going. So Vegas, they know what they're doing. There's a lot of lights and big buildings and all sorts of stuff for a reason. And if they're telling me there's 25 points to be had, I want to figure out where that is. And I think that the players that are involved therein are going to be cheap. So the value is definitely there to be had.
I like the pretty lights. This is the Power Grid Footballguys.com video show, podcast extraordinaire that you can check out on the Audible feed on iTunes. I'm your host, Cecil Lammy. Let's go position by position and break down each one, talking about chalk, cash, GPP, guys you're going to fade, and basically the brain dump portion of the program. So I've got my handy-dandy notebook out, and I'm ready to take notes. So, Dodds, you're up. Let's talk about quarterbacks. And, again, it can be chalk, cash, GPP, fade. Just your thoughts on this position, players that stand out.
Yeah, a lot actually make the cut on my criteria list. I think as far as cash games, I'm real high on Trevor Siemian. I think Jimmy Garoppolo could also be return excellent value there. I think if you can afford him, Cam Newton makes a great play. And then I think Carson Palmer's a bit under the radar for my GPP list. So those are guys that I'm mostly targeting. Game strategies that I think are going to play out and those quarterbacks doing quite well.
Devin, you're up with your thoughts on quarterbacks in week 2.
Yeah, you have to throw Eli Manning out there. I think that he is he's going to throw for potentially the most yards this week. The question is, you have to build your lineup around if you can afford him, and he's expensive in some places and in a value in others. But the two guys that I'm targeting are Josh McCown and Jimmy Garoppolo. For McCown, he threw for over 300 yards last year against the Ravens. They're going to have to pass the ball frequently. It's just they get behind and they're going to have to throw and throw. Like we saw last year where McCown would frequently throw the ball 40-plus times. So just from a pure volume perspective, he's not the greatest quarterback, but someone they're going to have to move the ball somehow, and he's a guy that I'm targeting. And then, like I mentioned earlier, Garoppolo is a guy who really impressed me last week against Carolina. So he looks like he can step in and really is a value in some places.
You're a well-conditioned Browns fan, Devin. He's not the greatest quarterback. Yeah, he's happy slappy, but he'll do in Cleveland.
Well, when you're behind 21-0, you can't run the ball. You have to abandon the run. And from a fantasy perspective, he's much better than he is in a real life situation.
Take advantage of those poor defenses, and it's not just New Orleans. Austin, you're up with a conversation about quarterbacks.
Well, speaking of New Orleans, I think we've forgotten to point out the fact that the main reason why New Orleans defense is going to get even worse is they lost their top cornerback. Delvin Broken Leg is going to be out this week, and he
see what he did there, guys?
That was bad.
And I think that this is going to be really easy for Odell Beckham and Eli to play catch here. The problem is they're going to be super highly owned in GPPs. So I like Eli as a cash game play. He's going to be one of the guys I have a lot of exposure to. I also like Matt Stafford a lot as a cash game play this week, kind of in that same price range. Detroit has a pretty high implied total here, and I don't think Tennessee is going to do a whole lot to stop them in Detroit. So those are the two quarterbacks that I'm looking at. And I like David's call on Carson Palmer for GPPs. I think that high implied team total, but people are kind of off of him right now.
Yeah, I think that preseason really scared a lot of people. But did it scare Jeff Pasquino? Talk about quarterbacks, buddy.
I'm on the same cash, guys. Cam Newton's my top one. I think you got Eli there too. So I'll focus on GPP stuff. I think you got to look at the other side of the ball as far as the high totals and where the points are going to come from. I think Matt Ryan is a decent GPP play. They can throw the ball a lot. You see that they're using the backs of the backfield. I like Derek Carr. I like both sides of the ball. I think that Jameis Winston is a GPP play. And as far as points coming out of the Baltimore game, I'm with John there. And I think that a very interesting stack that no one will have is Joe Flacco and Dennis Pitta. I think those guys are on the same page. They love one another. They used to be roommates on the road. They will move the ball, and they will be PPR machines. And I think Pitta will get 5-6 catches again, 75 yards, and probably score against Cleveland.
And John, in Europe, your turn to talk about QBs in week 2.
Yeah, so I think the guys have touched on most of the folks I like. The one that I think that I'm going to try to work into my lineups this weekend as much as possible is Cam Newton. As a 14-point favorite, normally you would try to avoid a quarterback because they would be just handing the ball off ad nauseum. But on this team, they get inside the 5-yard line, and it's Cam. It's not Jonathan Stewart. I'm sure Jonathan Stewart secretly hates Cam for stealing whatever touchdowns he has an opportunity to get. But, they're going to score a lot of points. As I said earlier, they're 30 points implied team total. Cam Newton is expensive, but because the quarterback position has the least amount of variance of all the positions in fantasy football, I want to get my money in where it's good. And so for that reason, I'm going to try to build my lineups around him this week in my cash games. I think for GPPs, he'll be maybe a bit too high owned, so I'll probably come off of him there. And for GPPs, I think a name that hasn't been mentioned that's interesting to me, the implied team total is a little lower, and I think in certain cases, if you feel like you have an edge and some insight on the game, that's okay to go against what Vegas is saying for tournament play. And that's the guy I like is Blake Bortles this week going against Kansas City. I think that's an interesting spot for them because last week we saw Kansas City. They got pretty torn up by a San Diego offense that.
You mean they're going up against San Diego this week?
Yeah, they're going and traveling across the country for San Diego.
Still a great matchup, though.
It is. My notes were incorrect, and my apologies. But the premise is still the same. They're going up against they're going up against San Diego, and I think that this is a good spot for them where I think they'll be under-owned, or Bortles will be under-owned at a decent price point.
Yeah, people would think across the country, and it's actually better that it's the Chargers. So very, very interesting there. Not in our week 1 surprises, Dodds, as we switch gears to running back is, C.J. Anderson. It's not a surprise. But running backs this week, we've been talking about this horrible Colts defense, baby. You're talking about this Trevor Train? No, the C.J. Anderson hype train. I'm your engineer, so let's go.
Yeah.
What we talking running backs?
I think every single one of us is probably going to have shares of C.J. Anderson in our cash lineups. I don't think you can pretty much put together a cash lineup. FanDuel at 7,800, I think, is a lock. The lineup I like. I keep talking Trevor Siemian. I like matching him with C.J. Anderson in my cash lineups, and I think that floor between those two players is just unbelievable. That I think you're locking a lot of points really, really cheaply. But yeah, C.J. Anderson tops probably everybody's list this week for plays, if not D'Angelo Williams. Those are the two big things. The guy I'm going to shout out because no one else is going to be Rashad Jennings. Because everybody's on OBJ.
He did it.
I'm telling you right now, Rashad Jennings. That team, New Orleans, has gave up 17 touchdowns to running backs last year in their 16 games. They gave up 3 last week with a Detroit team that doesn't have a running back. I'm telling you right now, Rashad Jennings, get on board, win your TPP as you fade OBJ and his 50% ownership. There you have it.
Well, it's a good leverage play. I will give you that. OBJ will be so highly owned that if you go with Rashad Jennings, the implied ownership will be very low. I'm not sure. That's a hot take. I don't know. Hopefully, it depends on how far Dodds advertises this as to how high that ownership goes before Sunday morning.
Yeah, that's a sizzling take. But if the boss says it's okay to drink on the job, cheers. Evan, you're up with talk about running backs this week.
I won't mention Rashad Jennings. He falls into the TJ Yeldon. He's not good at football, so I don't play him. Mark Ingram is the guy that I want this week. He's going to be on the other side of the ball for Rashad Jennings. He only had 12 carries last week, and with Delvin Breaux being injured, they have to do something. They can't just keep throwing the ball and keeping their defense out on the field the entire game. So I expect on the road them trying to establish the run more than what they did last week against Oakland. He's not going to be one of the more popular picks, I don't think, because the air attack on both sides is going to be the popular play. So it's going to be one of the higher scoring games of the week. I also like C.J. Anderson and D'Angelo Williams, as David had mentioned, but Ingram is the tournament play for me.
Well, the Saints do have a defense. It's called Mark Ingram. Run the ball, eat up the play clock, and keep Eli and ODB and Sterling Shepard. Sleeper alert. Austin, you're up with talk about running. I'll get to Shepard in a bit. Let's talk running backs, Austin.
My top guys are C.J. Anderson and D'Angelo Williams, but going a little further down the list, I still like Thomas Rawls this week, who's been named the starter and should get about double the work that Kristen Michael's going to get. And then I'm still liking Spencer Ware, even though the game split was even snaps between him and Sharkhandrick West. The price is just still really low for a guy that is still producing at a very high level. He's only $6,800 at FanDuel, and I think that eventually his salary is going to get high enough that it's not worth it, but it still feels about right for me for cash games.
Pasquino, let's talk running backs, and I get a bunch of questions about Ryan Matthews. Of course, we know that nice, easy matchup against the Bears. Anything juicy there? What are you thinking about the RB?
Ryan Matthews, I'm not too on yet because I think there's going to still committee approach. I think Matthews does get a bulk work, but I think we're going to see more sprawls, as I said earlier, because of the tight end situation. My top two are C.J. Anderson and D'Angelo Williams, but I think you got to look at – surprised Dodds didn't mention him, Danny Woodhead in PPR. I think that you got to get him in the mix. He's going to get a lot of targets. As contrarian plays, I mentioned Jonathan Stewart, but I don't think the upside is there for GPP. The guys I like for upside are David Johnson in Arizona because he's very expensive in Arizona for $9,000 on FanDuel. Not going to be well owned. But the game script is such that they should have a lot of points in the lead. So I like that one. And we mentioned him earlier, Ezekiel Elliott. I think he gets 100 yards at a touchdown. He's at $7,900, comparable price point to C.J. Anderson. Great pivot, be lesser owned.
John, you're going to wrap up running backs. What do you got?
The one player I will be fading, Austin, we're going against one another this week, brother. Spencer Ware. I just don't like what I saw last week in terms of the snap counts. I do recognize that Spencer Ware gets those goal line carries, and I'm convinced that if he doesn't get a touchdown this weekend, he doesn't reach value. And so that's not a chance I want to take when they're splitting splitting snaps evenly.
Now be careful, John. Your buddy's going to make fun of you this week if Ware goes off. You know that, right?
I can live with that.
Okay. We got broad shoulders here. On the power grid, let's go wide receivers, and Dodds, that's you.
Yeah, lots of good names again. Mari Cooper kind of heads my list of guys that I just have to get in my lineup. I think Antonio Brown, you're kind of an idiot if you just slot him. I mean, until somebody actually shows they can defend what they're trying to do there. And again, people could say, well, Beckham's got a better matchup in this. Antonio Brown's good enough. I mean, if he's not the best receiver, he's damn close to it. And I think it's a situation where the quarterback play is just so much better. From Pittsburgh to Cincinnati, I'll ride with Antonio Brown until someone actually shows me a defense that can shut him down. Haven't seen it yet. I like Larry Fitzgerald. I like the fact that he's questionable now, but he's trending in the right way. So come Sunday, he's going to be somebody that maybe just people aren't on, that you can get quite a bit cheaper, but in a great plus matchup. And it definitely seems like, based on snap counts, John Brown's not as much part of that offense. I told you I love the Denver show. Emmanuel Sanders is somebody who's on my radar. And I think, there's just some other guys like Michael Crabtree in an offense with a high implied total could get a lot of action if people are looking more towards Amari Cooper. So, again, ownership is a piece of this, but I like some of the chalk names this week. I'm probably off Odell Beckham just because I'm riding the Rashad chain into the ground.
I want the T-shirt that says you must be an idiot if you don't play Antonio Brown. I want that T-shirt in Vegas. Let's talk wide receiver with you, Devin. What do you got?
Yeah, to piggyback off David's point, Antonio Brown, and there's been all kinds of talks of him going for 2,000 yards this year. If he gets to 2,000 yards, I'm going to have him every single week for this year. So until he proves, to David's point, until someone proves that they can shut him down or he gets injured, knock on wood, hopefully he doesn't. But I'm going to start him. He may not hit value every week, but I factor he's going to hit value 12 out of the 16 weeks, and that's good enough for me. The ups and downs, it's a long season. The one guy that I'm looking at that I don't think too many people are going to have, may not have watched the game last week is Kelvin Benjamin. He came back from his ACL, and he was the passing game. Everyone was worried about Devin Funchess and how Kelvin Benjamin would recover. He was targeted the most. He was a big play. I believe he scored a touchdown. I'll have to go back and check on that. But he was the guy in Carolina's passing game, and he's the guy that I don't think too many people will be on because his price is kind of in that weird mid-range of he's not in the top end of the Browns or Jones or Beckhams, but it's not in a value range either. So I think his ownership percentage will be lower.
Yeah, and so much for snap count. We heard going into week 1, like, Kelvin Benjamin going to be on a snap count? No. And then he came out and kicked ass on the wild side. Austin, you do that often with wide receivers. What are your takes this week?
This week, if you look a little further down the list, obviously there's guys at the top of the list that I think have great matchups this week. But I like Alshon Jeffrey in GPP. I think he's going to be pretty low owned and has high upside. The implied team total is kind of lower, so I think not as many people are going to be looking to him for their lineups. So I think that could give you some interesting differentiation, especially with guys like Amari Cooper and Benjamin in that similar price range that people are going to be higher on. A guy that's lower on the list that I like for cash games is Marvin Jones in Detroit. It's pretty clear that he is the number one receiver there for the Lions, and that Golden Tate has got a really low depth of target this season. They're using him a lot more in short routes. Marvin Jones is the guy I like to hit pay dirt and get deeper routes for the Lions this week.
Well, Pasquino, you're up with your wide receivers for week 2.
My number one wide receiver is not Antonio Brown this week. It's A.J. Green. And I think against Pittsburgh, he just dominates them. And that secondary, they got blitzed. They get torn apart by
Deshaun
Jackson.
Yeah,
Deshaun Jackson last week beat him. He's averaging over 9 catches, over 100 yards every week. He's good for 100 yards and a touchdown against Pittsburgh for the last 3 years. So I think he's not. I would look to pair him with Antonio Brown in all my cash lineups. And we already know, we've mentioned the GPP play, so there's plenty of wide receivers to go around there for Oakland and Atlanta for your GPPs, especially your wide receiver twos. And I also like going against Arizona for whoever the rookie cornerback is going to be covering. So I'm going to be looking for an exposed article that comes out in a day or so to see which guy that's going to be.
Make sure to check that out at footballguys.com. John, you get to wrap up wide receivers. Are you going to correct these guys, or are you going to say, I concur?
No, I concur with most of what's been said. I like a lot of those higher end guys. Going at the end here, I'll pick out a few that I haven't heard mentioned. One person I like this week is Jarvis Landry. Last week, the Patriots had a real issue covering the slot position, and Jarvis Landry obviously catches a lot of passes. I like him a bit more on PPR sites, but I think he's cheap enough that he merits consideration in both formats. I'd probably like him a little more in cash than I do in GPP because his touchdown upside is not as great. Jordan Matthews is a guy that I would be looking at this weekend. He had 14 targets last week. I think that this week, if Ertz is not playing, and it looks like that is probably the case, then there's no reason to think that we won't see double-digit targets again this week for Jordan Matthews. I'll go back to the well this week with Will Fuller. I think that the sites have not caught up with his pricing yet. He was in my article last week, and he blew up for 100 yards and a touchdown, and I'll go back to him one more time.
Let's talk some tight ends.
I'm not going to name a bunch of names because I'm just all in on Virgil Green. It's like if Eric Ebron can catch a touchdown against this crappy Indianapolis defense on all of this. And I think, again, just part of, again, the Trevor bandwagon, it's like Virgil Green. He's 4,600 on FanDuel. I think they basically had a touchdown last week. And basically a deflection, the last possible second where basically they just flailed their arms and kind of knocked the ball out of the air. It was wide open. So it's clear he's part of that game plan, and a young quarterback. I think they'll rely on the tight end. I see a lot of Virgil Green. He's so price is just so fitting with a hurt Gronk and guys like Jordan Reed, Greg Olsen, Kelsey, names that you'll kind of hear also mentioned. I just don't like paying up when there's so many great plus wide receiver and running back matchups. I'll go cheap at tight end, and I don't even think I'm giving anything up.
Big play Barnage, Devin, is that who you're going to talk about next?
Absolutely. I think that he is, when you factor in he was a top 3 tight end last year, when he had Josh McCown. He's not priced as a top 3 option this week, and for that reason, he's a must play for me.
All right, Austin, you get to talk tight ends in week 2.
I'm finding as I'm building my lineups that I'm going a little cheaper on tight end to make room for some of these other higher price plays that we've mentioned. One of the ways that I'm finding room is by using Virgil Green but also Kyle Rudolph. I think he's got a stable floor for cash games. He may not get you that touchdown every week, but he's going to get you like 50 or 60 yards each week. And some of these guys, you can't even count on that in the lower price range. So I like Rudolph as a cash game play. And then Barnage is a guy I'll have a lot of exposure to as well.
Yeah, and that Viking ship debuting on Sunday night in Minnesota. Pasquino, what do you think about the tight end position this week?
Well, I think a good way to be contrarian this week is to start with a higher-end tight end. I think Greg Olsen is definitely going to be producing. He's going to be the number 1 cost tight end that's out there this week. And it's because I don't expect Gronk to be active. So not many people are going to be on him, but I think he has a productive week. So that's an interesting way to build a contrarian lineup this week. I mentioned Dennis Pitta earlier. Not many people are on him. I think he's going to be very productive, especially on PPR sites, but I think he finds the end zone. Jesse James, he impressed me on Monday night. I think he's very much a talent. He's going to get a lot of targets. I think a lot of people are they're gravitating the same names that we mentioned earlier. But I think those are the guys. And also look for Oakland. Look for Clive Walford to do well this week.
I made the joke that Ben Roethlisberger still calls Jesse James Heath Miller. Like, Heath, good route, Heath. My name's Jesse. Shut up, Heath. Get out there. John, tight ends. What do you got? And I love the Jesse James. That's a great idea there. John, what do you got?
Yeah, so there's not a whole lot to add here. I really like the Virgil Green call. I'll be all on board with that. Last week, the Lions gave up 7 receptions for 108 yards and 3 touchdowns to Boyd or Lloyd or whatever the secondary. There you go.
Jack Doyle.
Yeah, Jack Doyle rules, I guess. I don't know. But I'm going all in on Virgil Green at that price point. I agree that Barnage is a different tight end with McCown at the helm. And then I think you can still look at Delaney Walker for a rebound game here. He's a guy that should be in play every week. They'll go against Detroit this week. They have 1 receiver in Tajay Sharp, who is likely going to be covered by Darius Slay for most of the day, and I think that effectively eliminates him from that passing game. And Delaney Walker coming off of a week where he kind of disappointed, I think this is a good rebound spot for him. And then if you want an off-the-board flyer for your GPPs, I'm not afraid of going back to the well this week with somebody who disappointed about 40% of the DFS population last week, and that's Jared Cook against Minnesota.
Wow.
I know a lot of people are against it, but it's one game.
You're going Bennett.
It's one game. If he continues to disappoint, I'm okay with that. But this week, he's so cheap on DraftKings that I have no problem going to him, and he's going to be about 5% owned.
There's a reason he's that cheap.
It's one career.
Jesse James here, guys, and that's Cincinnati allowed 1 touchdown last year to tight ends. 1 whole year.
That's bad, right?
With that, I think I'm fading that. By the way.
Well, let's wrap up the positions with a little defense kicker talk, and you can choose either one. I know Pasquino's chomping at the bit to talk kickers, even though kickers aren't people, but they matter in DFS. So, Dodds, defense kicker, anything on your mind here?
Cheap. I like to go cheap. So, yeah, I mean, the situations that look like they're pretty good. Oakland is pretty much, I think, the last 5 games have given up 9+ points to the kicker. So, who's playing Oakland?
Yeah.
That's always a good choice.
Yeah.
And, Devin, you're up with defense.
Yeah, I was going to say Matt Bryant is my favorite kicker on the board this week because Oakland allowed the most field goals in Atlanta's red zone. It's one of the worst in the NFL, so it matches up pretty well there. Defense, I'm paying up for Seattle as much as possible. Case Keenum just looked horrible. I know David said that San Francisco's defense looked better, but I think it's much more a fact that St. Louis's offense is just that bad. There's a reason they're not starting Jared Goff. It's the offensive line gave him very little time, and what time he had, he has no receivers really to throw to. When Kenny Britt is your number 1 receiver, it's really difficult to move the ball. So I would expect very good things from Seattle this week. and I think you can pay up. I think that there's enough value in other places that you don't have to go down cheap.
Austin, defense or kicker? What do you like?
I'm going to be all over Seattle's defense, but if I'm going a little cheaper on defense, I like the Patriots. They're only 4,500 at FanDuel and 3,000 at DraftKings. They're my cheap defense, so I'll have the most exposure to the Patriots and the Seahawks this week.
Pasquino, you have the floor. I know you're going to talk kickers, so let's have it.
Well, I endured that late Monday night game. That's how dedicated a football guy I am, and I totally agree with Devin's assessment. It's Seattle. LA looks terrible, so Seattle was a great defense. I like New England as well. Carolina is a great defense. San Francisco has the shortest schedule. Carolina has 3 extra days off. San Francisco is playing 1 o'clock on the East Coast. It's going to be a nightmare. I think Carolina defense is a great play this week. Kicker-wise, Brandon McManus, whenever he's at home for Denver and he's facing that terrible defense, that's my number 1 kicker.
And let's go defense and kicker with you, John.
Yep, it's Carolina and Seattle for me. Carolina is my play, I think, for all the reasons that Jeff just said. They have extra time to prepare. I think that this San Francisco team is going to just completely flop after that big victory on Monday night. And as a 13.5-point favorite, this could get really ugly for Blaine Gabbert and company. I love this defense. I don't mind paying up for them at 5,300 on FanDuel. I think they're worth every nickel of that salary. And so I'll probably have the most of Carolina. But I do like Seattle for all the reasons the other guys said. At the other end of things, I do think that Austin, I'll agree with you here. I do think the Patriots are a pretty good, quote, punt play at the defense position. And regarding kickers, I'm not talking about kickers.
Yeah, did you see Pasquino perk up when you said punt play? This is the Power Grid, Footballguys.com, DFS podcast and video show. We appreciate everyone for watching, for subscribing on YouTube.com/FootballGuys, DOTCOM, and also subscribing to the Audible and checking out Footballguys.com. Let's do our stacks presented by Pringles. Come on, Weimer, get on that. Dodds, give me a stack. I mean, is it Eli, Odell? It almost sounds like you're going to triple stack that Denver thing with Trevor, Virgil, and CJ.
I am. I'm playing it real similar in the GPP and the cash games. I'm going to go Trevor. I'm going to go CJ. I'm going to go Virgil Green as my power stack GPP, and Rashad Jennings. That's my differentiation.
All right, stacks with you, Devin. Who do you like? I mean, are we talking Cam Newton, Kelvin Benjamin?
We are, and they are my top non-New Orleans / Giants stack. I'm not going to use the Giants or New Orleans just because I think that they're going to be too highly owned for me. As I mentioned, there isn't too much variation as far as expected points scored, and as I believe John mentioned, that Carolina is expected to score the most points this week. So I'll be using a lot of Cam and Kelvin Benjamin.
Austin, what about an Eli Sterling Shepard stack? Since everyone's going to try to fit Odell Beckham Jr. in, let's talk about that one, and then maybe one of your favorite stacks this week.
Yeah, no, that's one that I would mention for sure. I think if you're looking for differentiation, but you want a part of that high-scoring game, I think that's a good way to do it. I also like the Derek Carr, Amari Cooper stack here. And then if you want to get a little bit wild, you could go I don't know, maybe Aaron Rodgers, Jordy Nelson. I'm not saying it's a high implied total. I'm not saying it's a great matchup, but the upside is something that I think I'm going to throw into a couple of lineups.
Just don't say Jared Cook. Pasquino, you're up with your stacks this week.
Well, I've hammered the nail on the head here with Baltimore and Pitta, who would be my punt play since you're asking. So got to get that in there. But of the 2 stacks that are going to be less around, I think Baltimore is going to be one. I really like Oakland. I would use both receivers there, maybe a Walford, but I think you look at Crabtree and Cooper. I think it's a great stack with Derek Carr. I also like Cincinnati. I think you could triple stack Cincinnati against Pittsburgh. That's going to be a lot more high scoring because Pittsburgh can put a lot of points on the board. I think that could be turned into a shootout. It has before. A.J. Green, the Red Rifle, and also Gio Bernard.
Make it happen, John. Who are your stacks this week?
One that has been mentioned already, at least implicitly. I think that Josh McCown and Gary Barnidge should be a cheap stack that allows you a lot of flexibility at other positions because they're both fairly inexpensive. And then one that's kind of off the board, looking over the game logs from Monday night, Larry Fitzgerald had 10 targets, but next in line was Michael Floyd at 7. Fitzgerald did everything with his targets, and Michael Floyd did nothing with his. If that kind of distribution continues, you're going to see this week Arizona has the 3rd highest implied team total on the entire slate, and everybody's either going to be on David Johnson or Larry Fitzgerald, and nobody will be on Michael Floyd. And so for that reason, when the crowd goes one way, I want to go the other way with my stacks, and so I'm going to have a whole lot of Carson Palmer and Michael Floyd, and I think that will really differentiate me.
Now, to wrap up the power grid, we are going to do our speed round. We've got 3 topics. Does everyone have their black-eyed Joes ready to go? And if you agree, it's green. If you disagree, it's red. And let's start with our first question. Todd Gurley will surpass 70 all-purpose yards against Seattle. Yes or no? Todd Gurley. Looks like 1 green, John. Why?
I know it's an unpopular thing, but I just think this guy is just one play away from getting half of that number of yards. And so, I don't think that they're going to hold him back to the degree that we saw on Monday night. There will be some corrections in that backfield. We've already read that they were telegraphing their plays. I think that'll be corrected, and I think we'll see an improvement, at least where Gurley is concerned this week. And 70 yards is not a whole lot from a guy of his ilk.
Now the speed round question, which is easier this week, cash or GPP? I guess cash would be green, GPP would be red. So it's cash. Oh, no, GPP for Austin. The old switcheroo there at the end.
Yeah, I think that what's making it hard for me to build cash lineups this week is I like a lot of players that are already priced pretty high. And we're coming off of a week where we had a lot of guys I like that were priced pretty low. And so I can't squeeze all these guys into my lineup. And I'm finding I'm building a lot of lineups right off the bat that are like a little bit over the cap. So GPP, I think that there's a lot of bias and overreaction to week 1. And they're all going to swing to a lot of the same guys. And so I think it's easier to find differentiation in GPPs this week when people are going to kind of lemming follow the guys who did well in week 1.
Can I clarify one thing real quick? The thing that scares me about GPPs is the smart plays did not start New Orleans or the Giants, but in reality, that game could be a shootout. And it scares me a little bit as far as, yes, you want to be contrarian because they're going to be so highly owned, but at the same time, it's if that game goes off, you're going to lose a lot of your contests.
Yeah, you got to keep up with the Joneses. And the final one, in honor of our guest, in honor of our boss, this is our David Dodds special. Danny Woodhead, over 6 receptions or no? Yes or no for Woodhead? Yes. A no for Devin. Don't believe in the white Reggie Bush.
I don't. I know David loves him, but I really think that they're trying to establish Melvin Gordon. And I think that they have enough talent with Travis Benjamin, Antonio Gates, Tyrell Williams. We'll see what he brings to the table. But I don't know that they are going to need to go to such a pass-heavy offense where Danny Woodhead gets so involved. I think that they really try to bring Melvin Gordon in, establish the run, and see what this kid has. They used a first-round pick on him, and he looked significantly better from last year, although last year he looked as if he shouldn't be an NFL player. So, I think it's a let's see what we have in this guy. And if it was a few weeks from now, I think and they've abandoned Melvin Gordon, then maybe, but we'll see.
Dodds, tell Devin why he's wrong.
Because Keenan Allen runs all the same right. Basically, Danny Woodhead's going to be playing a lot of the field where, Keenan Allen was going to run to. So we'll basically have both of those guys. We'll see a lot of action, but you'll see a lot of passes thrown to Danny Woodhead. He is very much about them moving the ball.
Pasquino, you gave the green light for Woodhead.
If you like Woodhead this week, I think you have to like Blake Bortles in the Jacksonville passing game because that's really this game script that gets them to have to throw. So there's an interesting stack that may not be owned. It's sort of a game stack where you may take Robinson, Bortles, and Danny Woodhead. I think that's a game script that plays out pretty nicely for your lineup.
And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is a wrap. Mr. David Dodds, we appreciate you for joining us, man.
Yeah, outstanding. This has been fun.
I am your host, Cecil Lammy, for the great David Dodds, the fantastic Devin Knotts, the outstanding Austin Lee, the stupendous Jeff Pasquino, and the spectacular John Lee. Who reads Spider-Man here? I'm Cecil Lammy saying thanks very much for listening, for watching. Stay tuned, and as always, stay frosty, people.
I'm all aboard the Denver train. You guys better get on board.
No, thank you.
Woo woo.